Hey, fourth graders, we are starting a new chapter this week in math, chapter 10. This is our first chapter in geometry, so here we go. Today's lesson is 10.1, and this covers lines, rays, and angles. So before we get started, I wanted to show you what our slide will look like for this week. So you'll see right now you are already doing the first step, which is watching the mini lesson. Okay, once this mini lesson is done, you're going to have some options. There is a practice page here. If practicing on pen and paper or pencil and paper is something that you would rather do, there's your option there. You can do numbers 2 through 10, and on a notebook sheet of paper is just fine. If you choose to do this option, please make sure you share it on Google Classroom or Seesaw or by email to your teacher so they can see that you did it. Otherwise, over here we have some really cool games, Line Splat and Angles. Those are both on the computer, as well as Prodigy. The fourth activity is something you can do at home without using technology. So we have a chart of all kinds of geometry that we find in real life. So they gave you some examples of what a point could be, a line segment, a line, a ray, intersecting lines, perpendicular lines, and parallel. So that's all the stuff we're going to be learning today. You can choose with this activity to take pictures of things that you find around your house or outside that are in real life that use these types of geometry, and then you can post them as well on Seesaw or email them to your teacher. All right, so let's get started. So this week, again, is learning what different vocabulary or terms we need in order to study geometry. You will not have to memorize these, but it's just really important to get as comfortable with them as you can. So when we start, we actually start, I'm going to zoom in here, with what we call a point, okay? So a point is the exact location in space, okay? So the example they give us is point A. So you can see it's literally, I'm kind of coloring it out here, it's just a point, okay? So a point is an exact spot in space. When we read it, we say it point A, okay? So if this were actually, if it had a C by it, I would read it as point C. If it had a V, I'd read it as point V, okay? But here we have A, so it's point A. We write it the same way, point A, and we think of it as that tip of our pencil, okay? That edge of that lead would be our point, all right? So again, a point is the exact location in space, okay? A line is our next one. So a line is a straight path of points that continues without end in both directions. So a line never ends, okay? When we look at how we draw it, we can see that it never ends because on both sides of our line, you'll see an arrow. So that's saying that no matter what, our line will continue on and on and on and on forever, okay? So in this picture, they have it labeled, how we would read it is line BC. If you're going this way, right, it'd be B to C. Or what's really cool with a line is since it never ends, it can go either direction. So you can read it as line BC, or you can read it as line CB, either one. Okay, so line BC or line CB. When we write the line, we write it exactly how it looks. So whether you're going to say BC or CB, remember it doesn't matter which way, but we know it's a line because on top it has a line with an arrow on both sides, okay? So if I had, for example, line ST, I would rewrite that as ST with my arrow on top on both sides. Or I could write it as line TS, because with lines, it doesn't matter which way it goes, okay? We think of a line as a road out in the middle of a desert, right? Because it just keeps going and going and going. So a road, sometimes it stops. So we're thinking just they go both directions and it never ends, all right? Next is a line segment. A line segment is a part of a line between two endpoints. Okay, so I try to like to compare a line and line segment. So when I do that, a line, as you can see up above, it has both of those arrows on the end, right? It keeps going on forever and ever. A line segment does not. A line segment stops at both of its endpoints. Okay, so for our example, we have line segment DE. It starts at D, it ends at E. It also starts at E and ends at D, but it cannot go any farther than that. So when we read it as line segment DE or line segment ED, and we write it with just a line above the top. So again, if I had my line segment of ST, I would write ST with just a line across the top, or TS with just a straight line with no arrows. Okay, so review so far. We have a point. That's just a dot, an exact location in space. We have a line that never ever ends, and we have a line segment, so that's part of a line. Okay, and it does stop. So when we think of it here on this yield sign, we have a line segment that runs from this corner to this corner, right? Because it stops at each point, which then hooks to another line segment, which then hooks to another line segment, okay? And that's how we get to rays. So rays are in the bottom of our chart here. A ray is a part of the line that has one endpoint and continues without end in the other direction. So a ray is kind of a mix of a line and a line segment. Okay, so you can see it starts with F, point F, and it goes to point G, but it continues going. Okay, so we read that as ray FG, and we write it as that FG with one arrow. And this is what's important, as you can see in my picture, the arrow is by the G, right? So you have to make sure when you write it that the arrow is also by that same letter. Because if I wrote it the opposite way with the arrow going towards the F, it would not make sense. Okay, so we think of rays, for example, on the one-way sign, if you've ever seen these on the road, it has its endpoint, and then it has its arrow that keeps going. Okay, so using that chart that we have, let's see if we can answer, I'm gonna zoom in so you can see a little better, there we go. Let's see if we can answer these two problems on the bottom. So it says, draw and label, ooh, how would we read this? I see a J and a K with a line with no arrows. What do you think that's gonna be? A point, a line segment, or a ray? Think about it for a second. Okay, hopefully you have it in your head. We're gonna start by just writing the letters that were given. Okay, so this is what they gave us. I know if I see two letters with a straight line above it with no arrows, that's a line segment. So that means I'm gonna have a line that ends on both sides. So I'm gonna have my one end and my other end. And it's gonna be JK. Okay, you can see on here I drew it so that it's straight. Even if you did it like this, that'd still be right. Or if it was like this, that'd still be right. As long as they both end on the same side and there's not an arrow that keeps going, we have our line segment. So this was a line segment. Okay. So then it asks us on the bottom, is there another way to name line segment JK? Explain. Well, yes, there is one more way. So I'm going to give you a second and I'm going to see if you can think what would be the other way I could write line segment JK. All right, let's see if we thought of the same thing. I know that line segments can also go both directions. So if I rewrote it as line segment KJ, it'd be like that. Because when you have a line segment, either name can come first. It doesn't matter. So it's the same as the line. Either one can come first. The only time it matters of the order is when you have a ray. But if it's a line or a line segment, it can be either letter first. Okay? All right. So this is our first chunk. We have points, lines, line segments, and rays. So if you go back to the slides later, the game that would help you practice these is line splat. That's going to go over this first chunk. Okay. If we keep going to the next slide, we'll learn our last little chunk of terms here. So when we look at this next page, we see the word angles. I know you've probably heard of angles before, but angles are simply just formed by two rays. So when you look at this picture, I see one ray. There's one ray, it starts right here at point Q, and it goes up past point P, but it keeps going. So that's my first ray. My second ray, again, is at that point Q, but it's going towards point R, and it's going to keep going. And what that does is we see that both of these rays, the first one and the second one, share the same vertex point, is what we call it, at Q. So Q is our vertex. So when we have an angle, the point where they meet is called the vertex. And then what that gives us on the inside is an angle. So eventually we'll learn about how we can take this inside part and figure out how many degrees it is, but we'll get to that later in a different lesson. So just for now, remember that an angle is formed by two rays or line segments that have the same endpoint. Okay, so they don't always have to have the arrows at the end. They could be a line that ends too. Okay, and how we want to think about that maybe is like the slice of pizza, right? If this is my vertex and these are my line segments, a pizza is not going to go on. The slice of pizza is not going to go on for eternity and just keep going and going and going, right? The pizza stops. So that's an example of a line segment where two of those line segments meet together to make that angle. Okay, so they could be rays like they are in our picture, or line segments like they are with the pizza. How do we read it? We always say angle first before we say the letters. Now, if it is using a ray, you can say it either way. So we could say it, I'm going to erase this so we can see it a little better. There we go. You can read it this way, where you'd say angle PQR, or we could flip it and we could read it as angle RQP. And if we were just talking about the angle itself right here, we would read it angle Q, because that's where they meet. Okay. And we write it by using this cool little angle sign. It reminds me of when we do greater than or less than, the mouths, but the bottom is flat. So that's what makes it a little bit different. Okay, so I know this is a lot, but trust me, the more that you practice, the easier it'll get. So when we have angles, there are 4 different types of angles we're going to talk about in 4th grade. Okay, the first one is a right angle, and what that means is the points are meeting together to create a 90-degree angle. And that's what that blue square is. So it's saying they're coming together just right to give us that 90-degree angle. The way I think of a right angle is if, for example, if you think of a clock, if it was 3:15, that would be a right angle because you have the 3 and the 12 being touched. Okay? So a right angle forms a square corner. So it's exactly a square. Okay? The second one is a straight angle, and that forms a line. So you can see it just goes straight across. Third is an acute angle. An acute angle is less than or smaller than a right angle. So if I had a right angle right here to make that square, right, it would be going straight up. So anything in this area would be acute. Okay, same with obtuse. Obtuse is larger than or greater than a right angle. So my right angle would be straight up and down. So anything this way would be obtuse. Okay, so think of an acute angle as like, let's see, a mommy shark maybe. And the obtuse angle could be the daddy shark. He's opening like way bigger than he should be. Okay. Weird example, but just what came to my mind. So we're going to take these examples that we've learned in these terms, and we're going to try a problem together. Okay. So before we do this, let's review. So we have a point, which is just an exact location in space. We have a line that's a straight path of points. There we go. A line that is a straight path of points that continues without end in both directions. We have a line segment that's part of a line between two endpoints. And then we have a ray. And a ray has one of those sides that continues and one that's an endpoint. Okay. So those are our lines and rays. And then for angles, an angle is formed by two rays. So that makes an angle. And we learned about four kinds of angles. So we have the right angle. And that means with the right angle that it's forming that perfect square. So right angle. We have our straight angle. We have our acute, which remember that's smaller than our right angle. And we have our obtuse, which is bigger. Okay, so those are the terms that we learned today. So now we're going to look at this example. So using this picture, figure F, name a ray. So looking at number 10, name a ray. Looking at that picture, what could be an example of a ray that you see? So I'm going to give you one example, and then I want you to say out loud or write down a second one because there are more than one answer here. So one example could be ray BC. So that's starting right here at the end point, and it's going across to C, and it continues with that arrow. So BC. So ray BC is my answer. What is your answer? Can you find another one like I did? I'll give you a second. All right. If you're still looking, that's okay. Just pause the video and then you can start this back up when you're ready. All right, this next problem, number 11, is asking us to name an obtuse angle. So remember, our angle sign is going to go first. Oops. There we go. Angle, and then I have to find one that's an obtuse angle. So I'm looking for one that's greater than a right angle, or that's square. So I'm going to say angle A, B, K. So if I start at A, I go to that vertex point B, and then I go up to K. And I look at that, my goodness. I look at that middle section, and I know that's bigger than my right angle. Because if I was using a right angle, it'd be like right there. So I know that that's greater than a right angle. Angle ABK. Okay, so why don't you guys look again? Do you see any other ones that could work? All right, again, if you're still looking, that's fine. Pause the video. We're going to keep going. Okay, the next one is asking us, number 12, to name a line. So one line that I see is line AC. Start at A, goes across to C, and both have arrows on the end. So this one, again, I want you to find. Okay, did you find a different line than I did? If so, awesome. Tell me what it is. If not, pause the video and keep looking. Okay, so the next three I'm just going to show you really quick, and then I'm going to give you some time to work. So number 13 is asking us to name a line segment. The line segment that I see starts right here at point B, and it goes to the middle here to point R, because it stops, right? They don't keep going. So I would write line segment BR by writing BR with my line above it. Okay. Then for 14, it asks me to name a right angle. So I'm looking for that square. So I'm looking, where on the picture do I see that square? Well, I see one right here. So I know there's two ways I can write this. I could write it as angle PRC, or I could write it as angle CRP. Oops, not CRR, CRP. Okay. And then lastly, they're asking me to name that acute angle. I know that acute angles are smaller than that 90-degree angle. So I'm going to go with angle KBR, because that space inside is smaller than a right angle. So angle KBR. Okay. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. If you're confused about anything, feel free to go back and watch parts of this video again. Otherwise, you can head on to steps 2, 3, and 4. See you later.